There is a cliff face at Joggins, Nova Scotia, on the shore of the Bay of Fundy, where the exposed rock is 45 meters tall and 310 million years old. The cliff does not look like rock at first. Standing at the waterline at low tide, it looks more like a cross-section, something that was interrupted and left open. Inside the face, standing upright, are the remains of trees. Not impressions, not outlines. The actual stumps, still vertical, still rooted in the stone layer where they grew, now compressed into gray and brown sediment. These are lepidodendron, scale trees, that once reached 30 meters in height. They are standing where they stood when they died. The forest is still inside the rock. Between the tree layers, running as thin horizontal bands through the full height of the cliff, are seams of pure black material. Not coal, not shale, charcoal. The technical term is fusain, derived from the French word for charcoal drawing, and it is the specific residue produced when wood burns at temperatures above 300 degrees Celsius. These seams are between 1 and 4 centimeters thick. They recur throughout the cliff face at regular intervals. Some intervals are separated by meters of rock, representing thousands of years of undisturbed growth. The pattern is consistent. Growth, then black seam, then growth, then black seam. The cliff at Joggins is not a record of forests that died. It is a record of forests that burned, repeatedly, at scale. Geologists and paleontologists have studied Joggins for well over a century and a half. Sir Charles Lyell visited the site in 1842 and described it in his Travels in North America, calling it one of the most remarkable geological exposures he had encountered anywhere in the world. William Dawson, the Canadian geologist who published the first comprehensive monograph on the Joggins section in 1868, catalogued the standing trees and the associated fossil record with extraordinary precision. The site was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008, specifically in recognition of its completeness as a Carboniferous terrestrial record, the most intact window into that era's ecosystems currently known. The accepted explanation for the charcoal seams is fire ecology, the same process that operates in forests today. Lightning strikes a tree. A wildfire moves through the canopy. The forest burns. In the absence of anything else, it regenerates. Over decades, growth returns. Over centuries, the canopy closes again. The cycle repeats. This explanation is not speculative. It is well supported by decades of paleobotanical research, and the Joggins seams are cited in the literature as among the earliest clear physical evidence of recurring natural fire in Earth's terrestrial record. The charcoal at Joggins has been chemically confirmed as the combustion product of wood. The account has appeared in the scientific literature for over a century. It is not in dispute, but stand at the base of that cliff. Walk the waterline when the tide is out. The Bay of Fundy has the highest tidal range on Earth, up to 17 meters between high and low water. When it pulls back, the full face is exposed. Account the charcoal seams from the waterline to the top. They are not occasional. They are not clustered at one geological moment. They run through the full 45-meter record. Every few meters, another black band. Every black band, another fire. Every fire required a standing forest to precede it. Now notice what lies between the black seams. The rock between them is not blank sediment. It holds soil structures, root traces, compressed leaf litter, the burrows of carboniferous insects. These are not emergency deposits. These are the traces of undisturbed land surfaces, stable landscapes, growing things, standing water, living systems that were not anticipating what came next. Then the black line, then the soil again, then the black line again. The rhythm is not catastrophic. It is not the signature of a single mass extinction event, but it is the signature of a process, something that happened more than once across the same landscape, across an enormous span of time. Now, bring this out of the rock. The Carboniferous period ended approximately 300 million years ago. The ecosystems it hosted became the coal seams that run beneath North America, Europe, and Asia today. The forests did not simply vanish. They became the ground. The charcoal seams came with them. What is under our feet now was, for 60 million years, above our heads. Now look at what that ground looks like today, on the surface. The Great Plains of North America, stretching from the Saskatchewan border south through Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and into the Texas Panhandle. 45 million hectares of grass. No forest. The USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service classifies the soil here as mollisol, a deep, dark, carbon-rich layer averaging between 60 and 90 centimeters. Soil scientists studying the composition of this carbon have isolated its fractions. A significant portion is pyrogenic. That is the scientific term. It means charcoal. The dark soil of the Great Plains contains, distributed through its profile, the compressed remnant of organic material that burned, the Eurasian steppe. Beginning in Hungary, crossing Ukraine and Kazakhstan, extending through southern Siberia and into the Manchurian plain. 5,000 kilometers of continuous grassland, the largest unbroken grassland biome on Earth. The soil beneath it is Chernozem, Russian for Black Earth. The same dark carbon signature, the same elevated pyrogenic fraction, the same absence of standing forest at the surface. The Cerrado of Brazil. 2 million square kilometers of open savanna in the interior of South America, sitting on Precambrian bedrock that is among the oldest exposed rock on the planet. The soil holds dense charcoal horizons at multiple depths. Brazilian soil researchers have documented them at intervals suggesting fire events distributed across tens of thousands of years. The Mayombo landscapes of southern Africa, the Mitchell grasslands of Queensland, Australia, the Anatolian Plateau of Turkey, the Deccan Plateau of India. On every continent that sustains a major grassland biome, the soil beneath it contains pyrogenic carbon. Charcoal, 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 charcoal. The ground under the world's open spaces is not simply the soil that grass grows in. It is the record of what stood there before the grass and what ended it. The scientist who cataloged the global pattern of fossil charcoal most systematically was Andrew Scott, professor of geology at Royal Holloway, University of London. In the year 2000, Scott published a comprehensive review in the journal Paleogeography, Paleoclimatology, Paleoecology, titled The Pre-Quaternary History of Fire. The paper was not a report on a single site. It was a systematic survey, an accounting of fossil charcoal occurrences across the geological record, from the Devonian period 400 million years ago through the close of the Pliocene, with documentation drawn from sites on every inhabited continent. Scott's conclusion was that fire had been a persistent, a continuous presence in terrestrial ecosystems for at least 400 million years. Not occasional, not catastrophic, continuous. His documentation of fusane, the geological term for fossil charcoal, mineralogically preserved burned wood, showed it appearing in virtually every major terrestrial sedimentary deposit across geological time, wherever wood had been growing. The detail in Scott's paper that sits with you, if you read it carefully, is a spatial observation. The global distribution of fossil charcoal does not map cleanly onto what we know about the natural distribution of lightning ignition. Lightning strikes are concentrated along specific latitudinal bands and near topographic features. They are not evenly distributed across land masses. But the fossil charcoal record is distributed more broadly than that, more continuously, across a wider range of latitudes and landscape types than a lightning-driven fire ecology alone would predict. Scott named this discrepancy as an anomaly in taphonomy, in the science of how biological and chemical materials are preserved in the fossil record. He noted it. He raised related questions at conferences through the 1990s. His papers are part of the institutional archive at Royal Holloway. But the underlying question, what the distribution of ancient charcoal relative to lightning patterns might mean for how we understand the scale and origin of ancient fire, was observed, noted, and set aside. It is still set aside. Let me give you the numbers as they currently stand, sourced from the institutions that maintain them. And the total area of grassland and savanna biomes on Earth today is approximately 52 million square kilometers. That figure comes from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in their Global Forest Resources Assessment 2022. 52 million square kilometers is approximately 35% of Earth's total ice-free land surface. The total area of land currently covered by closed canopy forest is approximately 40 million square kilometers. Same report. Now look at what the paleogeographic record shows. But paleogeographic reconstructions of Carboniferous-era land cover, including those published by the Colorado Plateau Geosystems Research Group and by the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History in their publicly available Deep Time Reconstruction series, show that during peak Carboniferous conditions, dense coal swamp forest and closed canopy cover extended across latitudes that today correspond to the North American Great Plains, the Central Asian Steppe, and the Northern African Sahel. Forest where grass now grows. Forest where no forest grows today. The accepted explanation for the disappearance of those forests is climate shift. The Carboniferous Permian boundary, approximately 300 million years ago, was marked by a transition toward cooler and drier conditions. Forests contracted. Grasslands and arid systems expanded over millions of years. This is the scientific consensus, and the sedimentary record supports it. But here is what the accepted explanation requires in order to hold completely. It requires that forests covering a landmass larger than the continent of Africa, forests that had maintained continuous canopy cover for 60 million years, retreated from the surface without leaving their fire signature coherently distributed beneath the landscapes that replaced them. Or it requires that the fire signature they did leave is not the remnant of the transition itself, but only of the ordinary episodic fires that followed it. The USDA Agricultural Research Service, through its long-term Agroecosystem Research Network, has published carbon dating results from pyrogenic fractions isolated in Great Plains mollisol profiles. Charcoal horizons within those soils have been dated to periods that predate human presence in those landscapes by tens of thousands of years. The fires that produced those horizons were not campfires. They were not prescribed burns. They were something the soil recorded before we arrived to ask about it. The forests burned. The soil remembers. The official account of where those forests went does not fully account for what the soil is holding. The math does not close. I want to be precise about this. What I am describing is not a conspiracy argument. I am not claiming that anyone decided to burn the ancient forests, or that the scale of the evidence has been suppressed by any institution for any reason. Conspiracy requires coordination. Conspiracy requires intent. What we are looking at requires neither. It requires only the ordinary, recognized, well-documented operation of a knowledge system that assigns findings to existing categories without stopping to ask whether the categories themselves are large enough to hold what has been found. Pyrogenic carbon in grassland soils is a topic in soil science. Fossil charcoal in carboniferous strata is a topic in paleontology. Continental scale grassland distribution is a topic in climate science and biogeography. Each discipline sees its own portion of the pattern. No single discipline has been assigned the full map. No formal mechanism currently exists to require anyone to hold the full picture long enough to ask what it means. There are no memos. There is no meeting. There is no agenda. And there is only a very large question distributed across fields that do not, as a structural matter, routinely speak to each other about the same object at the same scale. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is not a failure of honesty. It is a failure of architecture. The question was not suppressed. It was simply never assembled. Thomas Kuhn described this mechanism in 1962 in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He called it paradigm inertia, the tendency of a scientific community to process anomalous data within the existing framework, rather than allow the anomaly to call the framework itself into question. A charcoal seam beneath a grassland is a fire event. That is the category. The category is well established. The finding fits the category and gets filed there. The question of what was burning, at what total scale, and whether the scale itself demands a revision of the categories. That question is not generated by the existing framework, because the framework was not designed to generate it. The sociologist of science, Robert Merton, described a complementary failure mode that he called obliteration by incorporation. A finding gets absorbed into the existing body of knowledge so completely that its original strangeness, the property that made it worth investigating further, becomes invisible in the absorbed form. The finding is known, it is cited, but it is cited as evidence of something familiar, and the unfamiliar thing it was pointing at stops being pointed at. What we are looking at has a name in at least two separate academic traditions. It is not a fringe observation about science, for it is a recognized structural property of how knowledge systems process anomalies. Not malice, not conspiracy. Gravity, the quiet, consistent pull of the existing map on everything that does not yet have a named place within it. The cliff at Joggins is still standing. It has been standing since before any language existed to describe what it holds. It has been standing since before the species that would eventually walk along its base at low tide and look upward and try to read it had evolved. It will be standing after every institution that has published a paper about it has closed, and after every person who ever walked its shoreline has been forgotten. The charcoal seams inside it are not waiting to be discovered. They have been documented. They have been named. They have been photographed and dated and published. What they are waiting for is a different question than the ones they have so far been asked. We call the site a fossil locality. We call the dark seams fire events. We call the open land above and beyond them a biome. We have our names and our categories and our filing systems, and the cliff stands in the tidal zone of the Bay of Fundy, where the highest tides on Earth withdraw 17 meters twice each day, exposing the full face, the full record, the full length of what was growing and then burning and then growing again for 60 million years before anyone was here to count it. The seams are still black. The grass on the plain above grows in soil built, in no small part, from what burned here before it arrived. We have stopped asking what the plain replaced. The cliff at Joggins is still standing, and it has been standing since before anyone alive was born. It will be standing after everyone alive is gone. The question it holds has not been asked out loud by anyone with the institutional position and the cross-disciplinary tools necessary to assemble an answer. Not yet. If the pyrogenic carbon beneath the world's grasslands is not simply a record of local episodic fires, if it is, instead, the distributed signature of a transition so large that no single discipline has ever stood back far enough to see it whole, then the question is not whether forests burned at the scale the charcoal suggests. The record answers that. The question is not how large the fires were. The math can be estimated from what the soil is holding. The question is why the open land that replaced the burned forests has been treated, so for the entire length of modern science, as a natural starting point rather than as an ending. Every grassland biome we study as a thing that is. We measure it, we model it, we name its species and map its extent, and project its future under climate scenarios. We do not, as a discipline, study it as a thing that